Welcome to Trump Teachings. Zoo. Zoo is a basic deck. It's named Zoo after Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering Zoo was a deck with a lot of small minions in it and very few spells. And in Hearthstone, it follows a similar concept. Zoo is just filled with efficient minions, very few spells, and it takes advantage of the Warlock hero ability so that when you run low on cards, you can just live tap. What we have here is the basic form of Zoo. I've only put in rares and under here. There are a few cards which require you to go deeper into Naxxramas, like Void Caller, and Imp Gang bosses in the second wing of Blackrock Mountain. Good news is Haunted Creeper and Rubian Egg are in the first wing of Naxxramas, and I highly recommend those two cards. The concept of this deck is really simple. You begin strong with 1-drops, and then you follow up with 2. You play really on curve, you spend your mana efficiently. You basically spend your mana every single turn. Eventually you have really strong combinations like Nerubian Egg plus Power Overwhelming. You attack with a 4-6 and then you get a 4-4, or you do Nerubian Egg plus Abusive Sergeant, or with Direwolf Alpha, or with Defender of Argus, or with Dark Iron Dwarf. Normal Zoo before Naxxramas already had buff cards in them because buff cards tend to be mana efficient and allow you to trade favorably very well. Nerubian Egg just gives you a really big bonus when it dies. Once you go into the late game, you just tap to draw a card, and then usually play both cards. Then you overwhelm the opponent. Sounds like a basic game plan, but I encourage this deck type a lot for newer players because it teaches so much about the basic fundamentals that I talked about before, like fearless tapping and mana efficiency and trading well. And oftentimes it does go into the long game. That's one thing I should say really clearly. Zoo is not a face deck. I'm going to say that again in a different way to emphasize the point. Zoo is often a control deck. It's not always the control deck, because if you're up against an even slower deck, then you play the role of aggro. But oftentimes, Zoo is a board control deck, where you are hitting the opponent's minions rather than his face. The change from this deck to something that's actually played in tournaments is rather simple. Removing the Direwolf Alphas and the Dark Iron Dwarf for the big cards, Dr. Boom, Mal'Ganis, which is really big with Void Caller, and Sea Giant, which is a really big card which takes advantage of implosions, many minions that it summons, as well as Haunted Creepers, and all that jazz. And by putting in all 3 of the big cards, it makes sure that Big Game Hunter only takes out 1 of them. One thing that I'll say is that there are a lot of different Zoo variants out there, and the best list is constantly up in flux. Throwing out some cards that are commonly seen which aren't in this deck include the Dark Iron Dwarf that was removed, another Mortal Coil, or 0 Mortal Coils. Sylvanas is in some of them, Lotheb's in some of them, a second Void Terror is quite common. Some of the decks still run Direwolf Alpha, 1 copy or even 2. And Bane of Doom is also very popular. But for the purposes of simplicity, we'll run with this list. The best list, as always, is an adaptation to whatever is going on in the metagame. Alright, let's take this Zoo out. Okay, so Zoo has 2 primary modes. One is against aggro, in which you play the board control game, and one is against control, in which you play the aggro game. In general, against both, you're looking for a good 1-2-3 keep. Here I have Power Overwhelming Synergy from Nerubian Egg. I have a 1-2-3. That looks good enough to keep. In general, against Warlock, I'm going to... most decks are going to mulligan, assuming that it's Zoo as the opponent. When it's Zoo versus Zoo, incidentally, there's like a very small mini-game which goes on, which is... Abusive Sergeant is a fine turn 1 play, but Abusive Sergeant loses to Voidwalker, but it beats Flame Imp, and if you have a Direwolf Alpha, I guess Abusive Sergeant ties with that, and that's all good for him. I'm going to consider coining out Imp Gang Boss here. Always look 1 turn ahead when you're Zoo, see what you're going to do the next turn. There's two main choices here. One is to play Nerubian Egg, and then the next turn you can do a 4-drop. The other play is the Imp Gang boss, which is clearly really strong against a 2-2. You're looking to play this guy against small minions. But the main problem is the next turn, there's no great play. So this is actually a tough turn. Like, Nerubian Egg into next turn Imp Gang boss, power overwhelming is clearly really good. Coin Imp Gang boss means next turn's play is just Nerubian Egg, and then you waste a mana, and you're really trying to be mana efficient. However, here the Imp Gang boss is just too strong against that card. In general, the really big thing to emphasize about this deck against most decks which aren't really heavy control are that you are a control deck. Classic beginner mistake to think you're not. That's a really good combo, Knife Juggler Implosion. The Knife Juggler can do really sick things with the setup of this deck, like breaking a Haunted Creeper and then playing Knife Juggler at the same turn is really commonly good. Ooh, that's interesting. So unfortunately, Implosion and Sea Giant work together really well. The bad news is there's no way that even if I roll a 4 on Implosion, can I get a 0 Sea Giant, because Implosion would kill something. So the play is between Implosion and Defender of Argus right now. It's actually really unobvious. You're looking for the card that gives you the most board control. Or you can even go Sea Giant. No, Sea Giant's too bad here. This is too big a threat to deal with. Defender of Argus is obviously really good. You can favorably trade, and then you can kill one, and you can have a egg. Implosion is just tends to be good to be played. I'll go Implosion. It might look a bit unusual to trade because you have the Sea Giant, but Zoo versus Zoo is just about hard board control, and usually the opponent would trade the imps into my imps anyways, and he could buff the imps in some way. Also, he could have his own Sea Giant.
My shield for Argus.
Ooh. So here, Implosion, if it hits for 2, then this would cost 2, and I wouldn't be able to kill anything. If it hits for 3, then there's 2 extra minions on the board, which means Sea Giant costs 2, and that wouldn't do anything. Implosion for 4 would mean 3 extra minions on the board, and I could Sea Giant for 1, which would be absolutely insane. Since we're not living in Dream World, I guess, I'll do the classically good. Especially if you're running Direwolf Alpha in your deck, make sure you pay attention to the positioning a lot. If you're running Direwolf Alpha, you want to place the Direwolf Alpha near the center, and you want to place it next to weak minions, so that when the weak minions die, the minions shuffle over. That's actually a really important skill in Zoo if you run Direwolf Alpha. If not, though, then the positioning doesn't matter as much. Oftentimes in most matchups with Zoo, well, in this specific matchup, Zoo versus Zoo, it is just a hard board control game, and he who controls the board early usually just runs away with it. There's some reverse ways to come back, but usually early game board control will just snowball into better board control because you're going to be the one controlling the trades. And Zoo runs very few catch-up cards, such as Hellfire or Shadowflame.
The light protects me.
Okay, always kind of look for the way you're gonna trade before you do anything. It's just that this was such an obvious play into the 5-4. 1-2, 1-2. Defender of Argus is nice, but it only saves an imp apiece.
So many.
And it saves 2 imps. And tapping is pretty good, but with the version with 2 Doom Guards, you tend to want to
My shield.
get rid of your hand earlier still. So you can play those Doom Guards without discarding cards, even though you have the Void Colors also. Void Colors are really looking for Doom Guard, and usually a lot of... Ooh, that's unfortunate. That's a case where you have 2 Doom Guards, and that's a bad case, but you would hope to have a Void Color out and be able to summon it that way. When you're thinking about your turn, always think about whether you're going to tap first. In this case, I'm going to spend my 8 mana on this, this, and this, so I will not tap. Try to send in the cards which provide the lowest, have the lowest health, and buff their attack, so that they don't hurt as much when dying. This will make it so that I have 2 spiders out, and that's going to still be enough room to play all of these cards. There's perhaps no greater demonstration of how this is a board control deck than against Hunter. In this matchup, you're just looking to survive at all costs. Hunters are by nature really aggressive, and the Zoo, if they can push it into the late game with their hero ability, which you can't really too often use because the opponent Hunter hero ability directly counters it, but in the late game, the Zoo deck is a little bit better.
I'll show them. I'll show them.
You generally shouldn't be afraid of playing Abusive Sergeant on turn 1.
Suffer my wrath.
Put this apple on your head.
One of the things to really look forward with in this deck is to do something like Haunted Creeper and lead it into Knife Juggler. In the case where the opponent didn't have a trap here, I play Knife Juggler, send this in, and then the knives will usually kill Knife Juggler. In this case, I don't know what the secret is, but it's usually Freezing Trap. Even if it was Explosive Trap, it would be fun to. It'd be fine to break this right now. It is important to break that because looking forward, it looks like the game plan would be to abuse of this egg into that. In this case, I will actually avoid playing the Voidwalker because his trade is too good. His 3-2 against my 1-3.
Get in there and fight, maggot.
I'll show them. I'll show them all.
You're almost always looking to clear the opponent's cards. In this case, though, just because either trap which comes out is so devastating, I'm going to instead ignore it and just defend it with Voidwalker. Actually, yes, I'll do that. One of the really important things to think about in this deck is how the combat is going to work among all the minions on the board. This is a control deck, and you're really aiming to control the flow of how minions attack each other. One of the enemies of Zoo is his explosive trap, based on him finishing that off, it's obvious that this is actually a freezing trap right now. Mal'Ganis with Void Caller is the best case scenario that you can get almost all the time. If this were a more control-heavy matchup, I would have considered playing Creeper and Tap instead, because in the end game you often want to just be tapping and then playing more minions, but against Hunters specifically, it's a little more iffy.
Ready to ride. I feel icky.
Oh, excellent.
To the void.
Ooh, really excellent. Okay, so I can ignore the 2 damage here if I'm immune, so I'll eat it first, and then I'll implosion. And I'll implosion the 2-1.
Well fought. I concede. For Doomhammer, your soul shall be mine.
The Nerubian Egg is a puzzling card. It is really, really strong, but you do need a card to go with it, and this goes 1-2. Since I'm going second, I will keep it, although I will mention this is really close. If I were going first, I might keep it also. Ideally, you're looking for a buff card like Power of Roaming or Abusive Sergeant with it, or Void Terror, or Defender of Argus, but you can assume to get it eventually. The matchup against Shaman is pretty much always one in which it's board control. I mean, if it's a really aggressive Shaman, of course you're going to be board controlling. And against the mid-range Shaman, which is the other general version, you're also going to be board controlling. The opponent's got a slower start, so Knife Juggler will be better than Egg, especially since Egg has no other card with it. Even if I had a buff card, such as an Abusive Sergeant, I'd play the Knife Juggler over it right now, so that I could pressure more. And it's not necessarily to pressure his face, but the Knife Juggler is more likely to be able to kill whatever he's got, or to force him to use something, instead of, say, playing a minion. Always got to look ahead of turn with this deck. Next turn, I do have a reasonable play, so the flexibility of the coin is not required. It's going to be Egg Tap. Getting out of 3-2 is well worth using the coin. Incidentally, usually the best turn 1 with this deck is Flame Imp, Coin Flame Imp. Speaking about looking ahead a turn, it might look good to just go Egg Creeper, but looking ahead a turn, 5 mana, I'll have nothing, so better here to tap, and then get better options for the next turn. And then also play a card, since it looks like there's nothing on his side to break the egg on so far, I'll go with the Creeper. This deck is board controlling enough to care about any card that is out here, even if it was like a useless totem. Useless totems can still be used. The opponent's having to use his 3 mana cards, Crackle, against the low cost cards of this deck, so the game is so far going really well. Kind of with the same reasoning as last turn. It looks like the next turn isn't going to be absolutely amazing, so that will slow down. This, and this was a possible play, followed with Tap, Defender of Argus. But I still see no real need to play the egg. As this goes into the late game, just tapping each turn seems to be pretty good. Since the coil doesn't seem to be very good in this matchup, it's more against aggressive decks, I'm going to basically trade it for another card. I will actually mention that it would have been better to Imp Gang Boss and then Coil first, because I might have drawn a 4 mana card which would have rather been played. Void Color specifically. Okay, so this is a little interesting. Whenever you draw Sea Giant, you can look forward to your Haunted Creepers making these cost 1 less apiece, so this could cost as little as 3. But in this case, I want the Haunted Creepers to stay on the board to play around the common Shaman card of Lightning Storm, especially since it's a later game deck. Probably still good to Implosion. I'll go ahead and Implosion first. And then a tap, I guess. It might look tempting to play the egg because protection against Lightning Storm, but I'm well protected enough against Lightning Storm since I have the 200 creepers.
My work is paramount. Leave me alone.
So this is a control deck, but as you can see, even against the control deck, it often just comes down to board control still. Alright, so the Sea Giant is going to be the cheapest right here, so I'll play it here. And now. Taunt is not going to matter in this matchup, so actually it will matter a little bit.
My shield for Argon.
I'll trade in the stronger 2/3 because the 3/5 having to go into the taunt might be useful for combat. Without this, for example, if he had Lightning Storm, then Blackwing Technician could go into the Haunted Creeper first and then split them up, and then he plays the Lightning Storm. But with this setup, it's harder for that to happen. Here I think I'm going to... So always plan out your turn with this deck, because it's important to think about whether or not you will tap. Egg Void Terror is looking quite good. I was also considering Void Caller Nubian Egg tap, but the problem with that is Void Caller doesn't guaranteed get out Mal'Ganis and might get Void Terror. So we'll just carry out this plan. This also happens to threaten a lot of damage next turn. You can see the efficiency of Egg. Nubian Egg is one of the best cards in this deck. On that turn for 7 mana, that was 15 worth of stats. Which is above the curve for what you can get for 7 mana, of course. 3, 7, 11, 12, 13, Defender of Argus would be lethal. Or even Mal'Ganis is lethal. So as it turns out with this deck, I guess if it's control, in the control matchup you can see that I tapped a lot more, and even though I could have played cards, I instead chose to tap to make the next turn better. So against control you're just looking to make use of your hero ability more, so that even though their cards are more efficient than yours, and they might be able to get 2-for-1s, at least you might be able to 2-for-2 by drawing a card each turn.